It wasn't yours. My mom said that in the kitchen after I had been paying the mortgage for over a year. Not rent. Not helping out with groceries once in a while. The actual mortgage. She said it while standing next to the coffee maker I bought when the old one died. In the house I had been helping keep out of foreclosure, like I was the one being strange for thinking my money should come with even a little say. That sentence did not come out of nowhere. It came out of one late payment notice, one crying phone call, one bad family decision dressed up as kindness, and the slow, ugly process of realizing that some people only say we when the bill is due. It started on a Sunday morning at 7:12. I still remember the time because I saw my mother's name on my phone that early and knew before answering that something was wrong. She never called that early unless it was either fake drama or real panic. With her, the annoying part was that both sounded almost exactly the same at first. When I answered, she did not even say hello. "Can you come over?" Her voice sounded tight. Not theatrical or fishing, just tight. I sat up in bed and looked at the clock. "What happened?" "I'll explain when you get here." That sentence alone should have warned me. People ask you to come over first when they know the details sound worse out loud than they do in their own head. I got dressed, drove 20 minutes across town, and found her standing in the driveway in pajama pants, a hoodie, and the kind of expression people wear when they're trying to keep the panic in their face from spreading to the rest of their body. The house looked the same as always from the outside. Two-story brick colonial in a neighborhood that used to sound fancy when I was a kid and now mostly sounded expensive. Small front porch, white trim that needed repainting. Bushes my mother kept saying she would replace when things settled down. The same cracked flower pot by the steps. The same fake wreath on the door that had been there so long it had faded unevenly from one side. Nothing about it looked like emergency. That was the thing about money problems in families. The front yard never tells the truth. When I got inside, she handed me a stack of mail and said, "Just read it." So I did. 2 mortgage notices. One more serious than the other. A late fee statement. Something from the servicer about default if the delinquency was not corrected. I flipped through them twice just to make sure I was not reading too much into the wording. I was not. "How far behind are you?" I asked. She crossed her arms and looked toward the dining room window. 2 months. I stared at her. "You're 2 months behind, and you're only telling me now?" I was trying to fix it. With what? She gave me a look like I had asked something rude instead of obvious. With my own money. That answer irritated me immediately because it did not answer anything. It was just the emotional version of slamming a door. At the time, I was 34. I had a steady job in logistics planning for a shipping company, decent savings, and just enough adult life behind me to know exactly how dangerous family emergencies become when nobody wants to say the real numbers. I was not rich. I was not some secret millionaire sitting on a beach house and a trust fund. But I had around $14,000 in savings, no kids, no mortgage of my own, and one of those lives that looked stable from the outside mostly because I tracked every dollar like a paranoid accountant. My mother knew that. That was part of why she called me. My father had been gone from her life for years by then. Not dead, just remarried, moved to Florida, and emotionally reduced to one birthday text and one Christmas call that always sounded like he was fitting me in between golf and pretending he was happier than he used to be. My mother had kept the house in the divorce because she wanted stability. That was the word she used. Stability for herself. Stability for my younger sister when she was still living there. Stability because she could not bear the idea of being the woman who had to leave the house after the marriage died. The problem was that wanting a house and being able to carry a house are not the same thing. My mother always confused attachment with affordability. If she loved a thing enough, she assumed she could somehow make the numbers respect her feelings. That had worked just long enough to become a habit. Then rates shifted, taxes climbed, grocery prices got stupid, her hours at the dental office got cut back after management changed, and whatever fragile balancing act she had been doing finally started failing in public. I sat at the kitchen table with the notices spread out in front of me. "How much do they need right now?" She told me. The number was ugly but not apocalyptic. Enough to hurt. Enough to matter. Enough that I understood immediately why she had waited until the second month to call. 1 missed payment can still sound temporary. 2 starts sounding like a pattern. "I can cover the catch-up," I said. Her shoulders dropped so fast it actually made me angry. Not because she was relieved. Because she looked relieved in a way that told me she had expected this outcome all along. She sat down across from me and put a hand over mine. I knew you'd help. That sentence was small, but it sat wrong. Not because I didn't want to help. Because I knew you'd help is not the same as I'm sorry I'm asking. It was not the same as shame. It was not the same as respect. It is expectation wearing gratitude's coat. I pulled my hand back and asked, "What's the actual plan after this?" She sighed like I was already making it harder than it needed to be. "I just need a little breathing room." I hate that phrase now because breathing room is what people say when they do not have a plan and would like your money to act like one. "Mom, what's the plan?" She looked annoyed, then tired, then emotional, all in about 5 seconds. "I've been doing this alone for years," she said. "Could you maybe not make me feel like I'm in court right now?" That was another one of her habits. The second a normal question threatened to become accountability, she shifted the conversation from facts to tone. I backed off more than I should have, because despite everything, she was still my mother. And there is still something humiliating about watching a parent look smaller than you remember. Even when you know part of the performance is real and part of it is useful, it still gets in. So I paid the catch-up amount that afternoon. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was stopping a bigger disaster. I told myself this was a clean intervention, not a doorway into a whole new arrangement. I was wrong on every count. For the next 2 months, things looked almost normal. She sounded grateful, softer than usual, less sharp. She even cooked dinner one Sunday and packed leftovers for me to take home, which felt less like affection and more like an old instinct dusted off because I had become financially relevant again. Then came the second conversation. She called on a Wednesday evening while I was still at work. "Can you come by after?" I nearly laughed. "Why? Just come by." So I did. That was another mistake. When I got there, she had papers laid out on the dining room table. Budget pages, bills, her pay stubs, a yellow legal pad with numbers and columns. That whole scene people build when they want you to feel like you are being shown reality instead of being prepared for a pitch. She pointed to the chair across from her. "Sit." I stayed standing for a second. "What is this?" She tapped the numbers. "This is me trying to be honest with you." No good conversation in a family has ever started with that sentence. I sat down anyway. What she had built on paper was simple enough. If she paid the mortgage alone, plus utilities, plus property taxes, plus food, plus all the usual life clutter that quietly eats your month alive, the house was going to keep dragging her under. Not immediately. Not in some cinematic countdown way. Slowly. Which is worse, because slow drowning always sounds solvable right up until the person is gone. Then she said the sentence that changed the whole structure of my next year. "You could just move back for a while." I looked at her. She kept going before I could answer. "It would help both of us. You'd save money. I'd have support. We'd stabilize things." There was that word again, hanging in the room like it had already decided the rest of the year. My rent at the time was annoying but manageable. I had a one-bedroom apartment over a laundromat, thin walls, a bad parking lot, and a landlord who fixed things in whatever order best protected his own convenience. But it was mine. I could close the door and be in my own life. That matters more than people think. "I'm not moving back in," I said. She looked wounded immediately. "Why not?" I almost said because I know you. Instead I said, because I'm 34. She made that little dismissive sound through her nose that she used whenever she wanted to act like I was making a normal issue sound dramatic. Lots of adults move home for a while now. Everything's expensive. That part was true, which made it dangerous. She was not wrong about costs. Rent was worse than it had been 2 years earlier. Utilities were stupid. Groceries felt insulting. Everybody I knew had some version of the same complaint. It felt like the floor price of ordinary life had quietly moved upward while nobody was looking. My mother could smell that truth and use it like perfume. "It doesn't have to be forever," she said. 6 months. Maybe a year. Just until things settle. I laughed at that. Not because it was funny. Because 6 months and until things settle are the kinds of units people use when they want access without terms. I told her I would think about it. Then I drove home irritated at her. Irritated at the housing market. Irritated at the fact that some part of me was already doing math. That was how it got me, not through guilt alone, but through numbers. If I moved back, even temporarily, I could save fast. I could cut my rent, help with the house, and maybe actually come out ahead. At least that was the spreadsheet version. The spreadsheet version never includes emotional cost because emotional cost is hard to quantify until it has already eaten a year of your life. I talked to two people about it. The first was my sister, who by then was living with her boyfriend and contributing absolutely nothing to the house except opinions. She said, "Honestly, if you can help mom and save money, why not?" That answer annoyed me partly because it was lazy and partly because it came from someone with zero skin in it. The second person was Erica, who I had been seeing for maybe 4 months. Not long enough to shape my life around, but long enough to trust her instincts more than my own in certain areas. When I explained it, she went quiet for a second and then asked, "If you move back, are you helping her get stable, or are you becoming the stability?" That was the better question. I should have listened to it. Instead, I built conditions in my own head and treated that like wisdom. I told myself I would contribute a fixed amount and nothing more. I told myself I would stay only until I hit a savings target. I told myself I would keep my boundaries clear, keep my accounts separate, and not let family help turn into open-ended access. That all sounded smart. Then real life met my mother's kitchen. I moved back in at the start of November, not upstairs into my old bedroom. My mother had turned that into a weird half-office, half-storage room full of plastic bins, old framed photos, wrapping paper, and 3 different lamps she claimed she might use when things got organized. So I took the guest room on the first floor for a while, then half the den once she decided she needed the room to flow better, which should tell you almost everything about how stable the arrangement really was. The agreement, if you can call it that, was simple. I would pay a set amount each month directly toward the mortgage and help with groceries. Nothing vague, nothing emotional, just numbers. For the first month, it almost felt workable. I gave her the money. She sounded grateful. I stayed out of her way. We had dinner together twice a week, watched a movie once, and even had one of those bizarrely peaceful afternoons where you start thinking maybe adulthood has softened the old patterns enough to make coexistence possible. Then the edges came back, like they always do. The first sign was language. When the mortgage was due, she said things like, "We're doing okay this month." When the electric bill came up, it became, "We need to be a little more careful." When groceries ran high, it was, "We're going through food faster now." But if I moved a chair, changed where the pans were stacked, asked whether we should finally fix the draft by the back door, or suggested maybe we stop buying random junk from QVC at midnight, the language changed instantly. This is still my house. Not ours, not even the house. Her house. That split got clearer every week. My money was collective, but my voice was not. One Friday night about a month after I moved in, I got home from work and found an HVAC guy in the driveway. My mother was standing on the porch in slippers and a zip-up fleece, looking tense. "What happened?" I asked. "The upstairs heat is acting weird." I looked at the truck, and she lowered her voice. "I may need you to cover this, and I'll make it up next month." That phrase should be carved on a family gravestone somewhere. "I'll make it up next month." That phrase should be carved on a family gravestone somewhere. I paid it. Then I paid the next thing too. Not because I wanted to. Because once you have already stepped in once, refusing the second thing feels less like setting a boundary and more like suddenly choosing the exact moment the roof should fall in. That is how people like my mother survive. They do not ask for your whole life at once. They just keep finding moments where saying no would make you look like a monster to yourself. By the end of that winter, I was not just helping with the mortgage. I was helping hold the entire illusion together. That was the point where the arrangement changed, even if nobody said it out loud. In the beginning, the house had been in trouble, and I had stepped in. By February, the house was no longer in immediate danger, which should have meant the pressure came down. It did not, and that was when I realized the pressure was not going anywhere. That is one of the dirtiest parts of family money problems. Once the emergency passes, people do not usually reset to gratitude. They reset to the new normal. My payment toward the mortgage was $1,200 a month by then. That had started as a fixed contribution and slowly turned into the number that made the whole place breathe. On top of that came groceries, random Target runs, the HVAC repair, a plumber for a backed-up sink line, and the usual little things that sound too stupid to argue about until you add them up and realize you are paying a second rent in pieces. My mother stopped sounding relieved every time I helped. She started sounding organized. That was worse. At first, when a bill came in, she used to hover around the subject. She would explain. She would sigh. She would give me that tired, stretched-thin look and say things like, "I hate even having to ask." By spring, she had moved on from that. Now it was, "The water bill is due on Thursday." Or, "I used your card for the groceries because mine's tight until Friday." Or, "The property tax installment is next week, so let's not do anything stupid with money." There was that word again, sitting between us like it explained everything. The weird thing was that the house did start looking better for a while, which made the whole setup more dangerous. The late notices stopped piling up on the counter. She paid the servicer on time. She got the lawn service caught up. She even bought new curtains for the dining room because, in her words, the house finally deserves to look normal again. That sentence almost made me laugh when she said it. Not because it sounded grateful. It sounded like the house mattered more than the person paying to keep it standing. That was my mother all over. She was never as openly aggressive as my father had been. She was cleaner than that. Softer. She did not swing a hammer. She wrapped the rope in ribbon and made you thank her for the bow. One Saturday morning in March, I came into the kitchen and found her sitting at the table with coffee, toast, and a legal pad. She had all the mortgage figures in one column, utilities in another, food in another, and then a few house repairs listed at the bottom like they were grocery items. I sat down across from her and said, "What's that?" She looked up and smiled. "Just trying to be smarter." That should have sounded harmless. Instead, it made the back of my neck tighten. Because she was not showing me a problem. She was showing me a system. And once a family problem becomes a system, you stop being the person who helped during a hard time and start becoming one of the load-bearing walls. She slid the pad toward me. "I think if we keep this pace for another year, I can really get ahead." Another year, I thought. I thought the point was to get stable. It is. No, stable is not the same as comfortable. That irritated her immediately. Her whole face changed in that subtle way she had when she thought I was being unfair without giving her enough material to play victim properly. "I am trying to think long-term," she said. "Long-term for who?" That landed hard enough that she had to look down at the pad before answering. She looked down at the pad for a second, then back at me. "For the house." There it was again, the house. The house had become a person in that kitchen. The house needed. The house deserved. The house could not take another hit. The house needed us to be smart. And us, for some miraculous reason, always seemed to include my money and her ownership. I said, "I'm not here to build your comfort zone." She gave me that look mother's perfect by middle age, the one that says your tone has become the real issue because the facts are being inconvenient. "You're being harsh." "No," I said. "I'm being clear." She stood up, took the legal pad, and ended the conversation by rinsing her cup too hard in the sink. That was her style too. If she could not win the content, she changed the emotional temperature and made you feel like you had kicked over a chair in church. The house started competing with the rest of my life in smaller ways after that. Not dramatic ways, just enough to keep irritating me every week. If Erica and I wanted to go away for a weekend, some bill would suddenly be due. If I mentioned replacing my car tires, my mother would sigh and say something like, "Timing is everything, I guess." If I ordered something for myself, like a new office chair after my back started acting up, she would notice the box and ask, "That must have been expensive," in exactly the tone that made it clear the real meaning was, "Must be nice to have money for yourself." That mattered because people always imagine financial control as screaming or obvious manipulation. That is never a good sign. One night Erica came over and the three of us had dinner, which was a mistake. My mother behaved herself at first. Polite. Warm enough. A little too interested in Erica's job, Erica's apartment, Erica's rent. That sort of thing. Then, halfway through dinner, she said, "Honestly, I'm just grateful he's here. I don't know what I would have done without him." That could have been a nice sentence. It was not. Because she said it while looking at Erica like she wanted credit, not while looking at me like she meant thanks. Erica smiled politely and said, "I'm glad it's helping." My mother nodded. "Oh, it helps a lot. He's basically the reason the house is still standing." That sentence hung there for a second, and that should have sounded like acknowledgement, but something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. It was too public, too polished, like a line she had been waiting to use in front of a witness. Then she followed it with, "It's nice when family understands what matters." There was the knife, not deep or dramatic, but there. After dinner, when we got into Erica's car so she could drive me to the hardware store for a couple things, she looked at me and said, "You know she's building a story, right?" I turned toward her. "What story?" The one where you're a good son as long as the money keeps coming. That irritated me because I already knew she was right. I'm not stupid, I said. She looked back at the house, then at me. I know. But you are staying in a situation that keeps rewarding her for not changing. That sentence stayed with me because it was harder to dismiss than the others. Around the same time, my younger sister started dropping by more often. She started dropping by more often, not to help, obviously. One Sunday afternoon, she was standing in the kitchen eating grapes straight from the bag and said, "Honestly, this is probably good for you too. You'd just be wasting money on rent otherwise." I looked at her and said, "You know that's easy to say when you don't pay for anything here." She rolled her eyes. "I'm just being realistic." That whole family had a talent for turning convenience into realism. My mother, of course, defended her. "Your sister's not wrong," she said. "You're saving a lot." That part was technically true, which made it harder to fight cleanly. I was saving, just not the way I had imagined. Every month, I felt like I was making progress, and then some new expense would appear in the house and swallow part of the gap. The numbers still looked better than living alone. That was how the trap stayed alive. The spreadsheet looked practical. The spreadsheet looked practical. The atmosphere felt poisonous. There had been a bad storm in late spring. Nothing cinematic, just enough wind and rain to knock down branches and expose every weak part of an older house. 2 days later, she had somebody out to look at a section over the back rooms where the shingles had lifted and water had started staining the ceiling near the hallway smoke detector. I came home from work and found a folder on the kitchen counter. Inside was the estimate. I looked at her. "What's this?" She was wiping down the stove. "The roofer's estimate." "Okay." She kept wiping. Then she said, "I figured we could split it." That word hit harder than the number did. We could split it. Not, "Can you help with this?" Not, "I'm in trouble again." Not, "I know this is unfair." Just we could split it, like of course that was the natural math of the house now. I stared at the estimate. Why would we split it? That got her attention. She turned around slowly with the sponge still in her hand. "Because you live here." I laughed once. It came out sharp. "That's your reason for everything." Her face closed. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I pay into the mortgage, the groceries, utilities, repairs, random bullshit every month, and every time I question where the line is, the answer is just because you live here." She set the sponge down. "I'm not going to apologize for needing help." "That's not what I asked." "What did you ask then?" I held up the estimate. "I asked why this automatically becomes my problem." The room got quiet. Not dramatic, just flat. That was always when she got most dangerous, because my mother did some of her best work in a calm voice. "You are making this sound very transactional," she said. I looked at her and almost smiled. It was transactional. That was the whole point. The problem was that she wanted the transaction to stay emotional enough that she never had to say it plainly. "I am helping pay the mortgage," I said. "That is a transaction." Her jaw tightened slightly. "That is family." "No," I said. "Family is what you call it, so I don't ask harder questions." That landed hard enough that she turned away first, which was not a thing she did when she felt in control. I paid half of the roof repair anyway. That is the embarrassing part. Not because she convinced me. Because even when you see the mechanism clearly, it is still hard to be the exact person who lets the hallway ceiling stain spread while proving a point. That is the real evil in these arrangements. They make your boundaries feel like cruelty. By the start of summer, the house ran on assumptions. My mortgage payment hit her account on the 1st. Groceries were partly mine unless she specifically said otherwise. Repairs were shared unless the problem was too obviously connected to something only she used. Utilities floated in that stupid moral middle where nobody said exactly who owed what, because ambiguity is where people like her live best. One Tuesday morning before work, she said, "Can you make sure the mortgage goes through a day early this month?" I was putting coffee into a travel mug. Why? That phrase again, like the house was an ICU patient and I was expected to keep donating blood until it could stand on its own feet. "It already goes through on time," I said. She looked offended immediately. "I know that." "Then why early?" She crossed her arms. "Because I asked." There it was again, not panic, not explanation, not numbers, just authority. I looked at her and said, "That's not an answer." She did not answer. She just gave me that cold, flat stare that mothers like her use when they want to make your perfectly normal question feel disrespectful. I sent it on the usual date. She was clipped with me for 2 days. That is another thing people do not talk about enough. Sometimes financial control is not about extracting more money. Sometimes it is just about reminding you that they resent not being able to move you at will. The real breaking point had not happened yet. But by then, the logic behind it was in every room. My money was part of the house, my voice was not, my contribution was family, and my expectation of fairness was attitude. And the worst part was that my mother had started to believe it so completely that when the final line came later, she said it like it was obvious. By then, the whole arrangement was running on assumptions. My payment hit her account on the 1st. Groceries were partly mine unless she specifically said otherwise. Repairs were shared unless the problem was too obviously tied to something only she used. Utilities floated in that same slippery moral middle where nobody ever said exactly who owed what, because ambiguity was where my mother did her best work. The problem with ambiguity is that it keeps everyone comfortable except the person paying for it. By then I had started tracking everything in a spreadsheet on my laptop. Not because I wanted to be dramatic, because I was getting sick of the way every month left me with the same feeling. I was helping too much to ignore it, but never enough to be treated like I had any standing. Mortgage contribution, groceries, HVAC, roof, water bill, random pharmacy runs when she was tight until Friday. A locksmith one weekend after her key snapped in the back door. Mulch and yard bags because apparently the house could not survive summer without looking respectable from the street. When you stacked it together, the number was ugly. Worse, it was steady. This was not me stepping in during one bad stretch anymore. This was me functioning as part of the structure while being reminded, in 10 small ways a week, that structurally and emotionally were not the same thing. The first time I pushed for actual clarity was over the mortgage portal. I had come home from work and found her at the kitchen table with the laptop open, scrolling through account history with that concentrated little frown she got when numbers stopped cooperating. She had a glass of wine beside her and 3 unopened envelopes near her elbow. "What happened?" I asked. "Nothing," she said too fast. "I'm just checking something." That answer alone told me there was, in fact, something. I stepped closer and looked at the screen. It was the mortgage account. For a second, I did not say anything. Then I asked, "Why don't I have the login for this?" She looked up at me like I had asked for the PIN to her debit card. "Why would you need it?" I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because by then that question almost felt automatic. Because I'm paying into it every month. You know where the money goes. That's not the point. She clicked the mouse twice, then closed the browser tab like that ended the conversation. "It's my mortgage account," she said. "You don't need to monitor it." That word annoyed me immediately. Monitor made it sound like I was trying to spy on her instead of understand the thing I was helping carry. "I'm not trying to monitor anything," I said. "I want transparency." She gave me that same look she always did when she wanted to turn a fair question into a personality issue. "You're making this sound very cold." "No," I said. "I'm making it sound like money." That landed badly. Her face tightened a little, then softened in the fake way it did right before she switched into the language of injury. "You know what?" she said. "Sometimes I think you forget I'm your mother." That line could have pulled me off balance a year earlier. By then it just irritated me. "No," I said. "I think you forget I'm not 12. We stared at each other for a second. Then she said, "You're acting like this is a business arrangement." I looked around the kitchen. At the envelopes. At the laptop. At the estimate folder still jammed beside the fruit bowl from the last repair. At the coffee maker, the light fixture, the new shelf brackets in the pantry, all the little objects that had shown up in that house through my money, while my actual role in it stayed deliberately blurry. "It is a business arrangement," I said. "You just don't like hearing it that way." She stood up so abruptly the chair legs scraped the floor. "That's enough." No answer, no login, no explanation, just enough. That night I sat in my room and stared at the spreadsheet for almost an hour. Then I made a second one. The first spreadsheet was what I had paid. The second was what would happen if I stopped. That one changed everything. Not all at once. Not in some lightning bolt revelation. Just enough to make the trap visible in a cleaner way. I could afford to leave the arrangement. It would hurt, but I could do it. The reason I had stayed was not that I had no options. It was that the setup had been engineered to make every option feel more selfish than staying. That is a powerful form of control. It does not lock the door. It just makes the exit feel immoral. After that, I started asking sharper questions. Not louder but sharper. If she said groceries were running high, I asked what she had already spent that week. If she said the house needed something, I asked whether it needed it now or whether it just felt better to solve it now because my paycheck had landed. She hated that, not because the questions were unfair, but because they forced the arrangement into daylight. One Thursday evening, she came into the den holding a stack of paint swatches and said, "I think I might redo the upstairs hallway before fall." I looked up from my laptop. "What?" She held them out toward me like she expected an opinion. "It's looking tired." I stared at her. "The upstairs hallway is looking tired." "Yes. And you're worried about paint." She lowered the swatches slightly. "It's not a crime to want the house to feel nice." That sentence told me more than she meant it to. Because there it was again. The shift. We were no longer in survival mode. We were in improvement mode, which meant the house had moved from emergency to identity again. And the more comfortable she got, the more obvious it became that my money had not just rescued her. It had restored her ability to pretend she was not close to the edge in the first place. "Who's paying for that?" I asked. Her face changed. "Excuse me. The paint." "I didn't say you were." "No," I said. "You just held the swatches out in my direction." That went over about as well as expected. She dropped them on the side table and said, "You've become impossible to talk to." That line actually made me smile. No, I thought. I've become expensive to manipulate. The real break started over a refinance conversation. Not a dramatic one. Just a stupid, ordinary Saturday morning where I finally got tired enough to stop being vague. She was making coffee. I was half awake, leaning against the counter, listening to the machine sputter like it was offended by the existence of beans. I said, "Have you looked into refinancing again?" She didn't answer at first. Then she said, "Why?" "Because if I'm paying into the mortgage this heavily, I need to know what the long-term plan is." She turned around slowly with the mug in her hand. "There doesn't need to be a long-term plan." That sentence hit harder than it should have. "What do you mean, there doesn't need to be one?" "I mean things are working right now." That was the ugliest answer she could have given, because it was so honest. Not working for both of us. Working for her, that was enough. I looked at her and said, "They're working because I'm helping carry them." She took a sip of coffee. "Yes," she said. "And that's what family does." I actually laughed at that. "You only say that when money is involved." She set the mug down. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means when the bill is due, suddenly it's family, we, shared burden, all of that. The second I ask for transparency or a real plan, it turns back into your house." Her mouth tightened. "You are living here. And paying here. You'd be paying more somewhere else." That line again. Always the same stupid spell people cast when they want the outside world to justify whatever is happening inside a house. "Maybe," I said. "At least it would be honest." That landed. I could tell because she stopped moving completely. "Honest?" she repeated. "Yes. You think I'm being dishonest with you?" I looked at her for a second and decided not to soften it. "Yes." That was the first time I had said it plainly. She stared at me long enough that I could actually hear the fridge humming behind us. Then she said, very quietly, "You're being cruel." There it was, her real weapon. Not rage, but woundedness. But there was no one else in the room that morning. Just me, her, and the truth sitting between the coffee maker and the sink. "I'm being direct," I said. "No," she replied. "You're acting like I tricked you." That irritated me immediately because it was so familiar. Different parent, same structure, same escape hatch, same attempt to turn your regret into the entire issue so nobody has to talk about what made the regret necessary. I said, "You did." She actually blinked at that. Not because she had never heard anything sharp from me, because she had not expected me to use that word. "Excuse me." "You heard me." Her face hardened in a way that made her look older. "I asked for help." "You asked for temporary help and turned it into a system. That's dramatic." "No," I said. "It's math." I went to work angry that day. Not explosive angry. The heavier kind. The kind that sits behind your ribs and turns every traffic light into an insult. At lunch I called Erica. We had almost broken things off 2 weeks earlier because she was tired of dating somebody whose life kept orbiting a house he did not even own. Fair enough. When I told her what had happened, she was quiet for a second and then asked, "Did she actually say there doesn't need to be a long-term plan?" "Yes." There was another pause, and then she said, "That's your answer." She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing something and acting on it are not the same. especially when the thing you need to act on is your own mother. The next push came through money again, because of course it did. A few days after that conversation, I came home and found a contractor's card on the counter with an estimate attached for some siding repair along one exterior section near the back window. I picked it up and called out, "What's this?" She answered from the laundry room, "Just something that needs to be done before it gets worse." I walked toward the sound of the dryer and held up the estimate. "And why is this on the counter for me?" She came into the hallway with a basket in her hands. "Because I wanted you to see it." "No," I said. "You wanted me to be part of it." She exhaled through her nose and set the basket down. "You know what? I'm getting very tired of your tone." That was the move again. Always the tone, never the number. I'm getting tired of every house problem somehow becoming a shared problem when it costs money and a private matter when it comes to ownership. That one landed clean enough that she had nothing to say for a second. Then she took the estimate out of my hand and said, "You really have started keeping score." That line was supposed to shame me. Instead, it just clarified the whole thing. "Yes," I said, "because nobody else is." She laughed once, short and mean. And that was new. Not hurt, not tired, just mean. "Do you hear yourself?" she asked. "You moved back here, save money, rebuild your life, and now suddenly you want to act like you bought the place." That sentence turned the whole hallway cold, because that was finally the shape of it. In her mind, there were only two versions of reality available. Either I was the son being helped, or I was some arrogant opportunist overreaching into territory that was never mine. There was no category for the truth, which was that she had trained the house to depend on my money while emotionally refusing every implication of that dependence. I looked at her and said, "I don't act like I bought the place. I act like I paid enough to stop being treated like a guest." She stared at me for a second. Then she said it, coldly, flatly, like it was obvious. "It wasn't yours." The words just sat there. No music, no shouting, no broken glass. Just 4 words in a hallway that smelled faintly like dryer sheets and old paint. I did not answer right away, because once somebody says something that clean, the only useful thing to do is let it finish echoing. She kept going because, like most people who finally say the cruel thing they mean, she mistook silence for weakness. "It was never yours," she said. "You were helping. That's all. Helping." That was the word again, always small enough to erase everything and soft enough to make the trap sound voluntary. I looked at her and asked, "Then why did it need so much of me?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out immediately. That mattered because for 1 second, maybe the first honest second in months, she did not have a good emotional translation ready. She just had the fact. The house had needed me. Maybe not legally in the way I wanted, and maybe not permanently, but enough for my money to matter, enough for my presence to matter, and enough for every month to breathe easier because I was in it. And still, when the topic shifted from money to dignity, her answer was simple. "It wasn't yours." That was the moment the arrangement died for me. It was not the day I moved in, or the day I paid the catch-up, or the day I covered HVAC, roof work, and groceries. It was that hallway and that sentence. Because once somebody tells you your money counts but your place never did, there is nothing left to negotiate except your exit. I went back into the den, sat down at my laptop, and opened the spreadsheet. Then I made one more column, what it costs to leave now. That was the first number that had felt honest in months. Not what it would cost if everything went perfectly, if the market softened, or if my mother suddenly became reasonable. Just what it would cost if I left now, took the hit, and stopped pretending the arrangement was still worth saving. The number was ugly. It was still better than staying. That was the thing I had been avoiding. Not because I couldn't do the math, but because I knew what the math was going to tell me. Leaving would hurt. It would slow me down. It would force me into a smaller place, a longer commute, and a tighter month-to-month life again. But staying was doing something worse. It was teaching my mother that access to my money mattered more than honesty with me. Once you see that clearly, every extra week starts feeling expensive in a different way. I stayed up too late that night. I pulled listings, cut subscriptions, reworked the budget, looked at rooms, small apartments, and one depressing studio over a dentist's office that smelled faintly like cleaning solution and old carpet even through the photos. I did not care. I was not shopping for comfort anymore. I was shopping for exit. The next morning my mother acted like nothing had happened. That was her style too. Drop a sentence like a blade, then make coffee like everyone should already be over it. She was at the counter buttering toast when I came into the kitchen. Do you want eggs? She asked. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so perfectly her. Last night she had reduced a year of payments to helping and told me the house was never mine. This morning she wanted to slide back into domestic normal like the hallway had not happened. No, I said. She nodded like I had answered something ordinary. I poured coffee, put the mug down, and said, I'm leaving. That got her attention. Not a lot, just enough. She set the knife down slowly and looked at me. What does that mean? It means I'm moving out. As soon as I lock something in. She gave me a long look, the kind designed to make you feel rash without her ever having to call you rash directly. All because of one conversation. That irritated me immediately because it was such a classic dodge. Not because of one conversation, one line, or one bad day. Because of what the whole machine had made clear. Not because of one conversation, I said. Because of what the conversation made clear. She crossed her arms. You're being dramatic. No, I said. I'm finally being expensive. That one landed. I could tell because her whole expression tightened. You can't just walk away from a mortgage payment and expect everything to be fine. There it was again, not concern about me, but concern about the house. I looked at her and said, You already told me it wasn't mine. That shut her up for a second. Then she said, That's not what I meant. Yes, it is. No, she snapped. You twisted it. I shook my head. I didn't twist anything. You said the quiet part out loud. Her face changed then. The softness was gone. The wounded mother tone was gone. What was left was sharper. You are living here because I let you, she said. That line again, with different wording and the same rot underneath it. And you are sleeping easier because I pay, I said. We stood there looking at each other across the kitchen island, both of us finally too tired to decorate the truth. Then she said, So what? Now you're punishing me. That question told me everything. In her mind, leaving was punishment, not consequence, not boundary, not adjustment. That is how people think when they have gotten too used to your support. The end of the arrangement feels like cruelty instead of reality. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm stepping out of something you already admitted wasn't mine. She looked away first. That mattered. I found a place 12 days later. It was a one-bedroom over a locksmith shop in an older part of town, with uneven floors, ugly blinds, a narrow kitchen, and a landlord who talked like every favor had to be dragged out of him by chain. The living room window faced an alley, and one side of the bedroom wall had clearly been patched twice by someone who believed paint solved more than it does. I took it anyway. The rent was higher than what I had been paying toward the house, lower than what I had feared, and ugly enough to be honest. No one in that apartment was going to tell me my money counted, but my say did not. I signed the lease on a Thursday during lunch. Then I sat in my car afterward and just stared at the steering wheel for a minute. Not because I was doubting it. Because I was angry at how long it had taken me to accept that a smaller life with cleaner boundaries was still a better life. When I got home that night, my mother was in the den watching some renovation show where people with impossible budgets kept talking about opening up the space. I stood in the doorway and said, I signed a lease. She muted the TV. For when? Beginning of next month. That was 3 weeks away. She stared at me for a second, then asked, And what exactly do you expect me to do? That question would have wrecked me 6 months earlier. That night, all I heard was the translation underneath it. How am I supposed to keep the house running if you stop? I said, the same thing you expected me to do when you said it wasn't mine. She looked at me like I had slapped her. That's ugly. No, I said. It's accurate. That was when she started crying. Not loudly. Not theatrically. Just enough to change the air in the room. Enough that if anyone had walked in, they would have seen a mother in pain and a son standing there with dry eyes and hard answers. That was always part of why these situations get so messy. The optics belong to the softer person, even when the structure belongs to the one taking advantage. I did everything for you kids, she said. There it was. The oldest currency in the room. I almost said yes, and then you charged interest. Instead I said, that doesn't give you rights over my adulthood. She cried harder at that. I left the room because I had finally learned something useful. Not every emotional response deserves to become your job. My sister called me that night, of course. My mother must have called her the second I walked away. She didn't even bother easing into it. What the hell is wrong with you? I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the half-zipped duffel bag on the floor. She called you already? She's crying. That doesn't answer my question. My sister let out one of those disgusted sighs people use when they want to sound like the adult in the room while contributing nothing useful. She needed help. I gave help. You're abandoning her. No, I said. I'm ending an arrangement. That pissed her off immediately. Listen to yourself. You sound like a lawyer. Good, I said. Somebody should. There was a pause. Then she said, you live there too. There it was. Everybody in that family knew the same script. I answered her with the only line that mattered. If it wasn't mine, it's not my mortgage. She went quiet after that. Not convinced. Just out of clean arguments. That sentence became my filter for the next 3 weeks. Every time my mother tried a new angle, I ran it through that line. You're leaving me in a bad position. If it wasn't mine, it's not my mortgage. You know how hard things are right now. If it wasn't mine, it's not my mortgage. After everything I've done for you. If it wasn't mine, it's not my mortgage. I didn't say it every time out loud, but I said it enough. The first few days after I signed the lease, the house went cold. Not loud, just cold. My mother stopped chatting in the kitchen. Stopped asking how work was. Stopped making those small domestic gestures that keep a house feeling like a home instead of a financial arrangement with walls. She moved around me like I was already partly gone and resented me for making her notice the empty space before I left. Then came the last ask, because of course there was a last ask. It happened over the dining room table on a Sunday afternoon with a property tax notice and a utility statement laid side by side, like she was presenting evidence in some little suburban trial. I need to know what you're covering before you go, she said. I stayed standing. I'm covering what I already committed to through the move date. Nothing new after that. She looked offended. That's it. Yes. She tapped the tax notice. And this? No. Her eyes lifted to mine. You'd really let me deal with this alone? That line came out so quietly it almost sounded sincere. Almost. But by then I had been there long enough to hear the mechanism under it. Not, can I manage this? Not, I'm scared. Just, will you still let my panic organize your choices? Yes, I said. She stared at me. Then she said the sentence I think she meant as punishment. You've changed. I looked at the notices on the table, then at the hallway, then at the staircase, the dining room chandelier I had helped replace, the patched plaster near the vent, the new curtain rod over the front window, all those stupid little pieces of the house I had paid for while being reminded none of it meant anything when it came to respect. No, I said. I just started listening. The move itself took 3 nights. I did not make it dramatic. I moved the practical things first. Clothes, laptop, documents, kitchen stuff, bedding, the folding desk, the lamp by the bed, then the smaller junk that accumulates around a person when they have been living half a life in someone else's house. My mother barely helped, which was fine. I didn't want help from her by then. Help had become too contaminated a word in that house. On the last night, I carried the final box to the front hall and stopped to look around once, not because I was sentimental, but because I wanted to see the place cleanly before it stopped being part of my daily life. The entry rug was crooked. One of the dining room curtains still hung lower than the other because the bracket had shifted. The paint by the back door was chipped where the draft always came through. The house still looked like a place trying harder than its budget. My mother was standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms folded. You really think this is going to feel better? She asked. There was no softness in her voice now, just bitterness and fatigue. Yes, I said. She gave a tiny nod, then said, you know, for someone who paid so much attention to every dollar, you still don't understand what a house costs. That would have landed harder before. That would have landed harder before. That night, all I heard was the same old religion. The house, the house, the house. I looked at her and said, no. I understand exactly what it costs. Then I picked up the box and left. The first month in the new place was tighter than I liked. The water pressure in the shower was bad. The upstairs neighbor had a habit of dropping something heavy at almost exactly 6:40 every morning. The fridge made a clicking noise every few hours that sounded like it was deciding whether life was worth continuing. My commute got longer. My grocery budget got uglier. But the numbers were clean. That mattered more than comfort. No one in that apartment told me "we" when the bill was due and mine when I asked questions. No one watched my spending like it was a referendum on my character. No one cried because I wanted money to come with terms. A week after I left, my mother called. I let it ring once, then picked up. How are you? She asked. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was kind, because it sounded like a reset button. Fine. There was a pause. Then she asked, "Did you change the payment schedule?" There it was. Always straight to the bloodline. Yes. Another pause. "And that's final?" "Yes." She exhaled slowly. "I just never thought you'd leave me like this." I stood in my ugly kitchen with the window cracked open and listened to that sentence for a second. Then I said, "You didn't leave me anything to stay for." She did not answer right away. And for once, neither did I. We ended the call a minute later without really resolving anything, which was probably the most honest ending available. The truth was simple. I had paid for the mortgage, the repairs, and the stability. And the second I asked for dignity to come with it, my mother reminded me that the house was never mine. Then neither was the burden. That was the whole lesson. Some people call it family when they want your money to arrive without your boundaries attached. Once you hear that clearly, leaving stops sounding cruel. It starts sounding expensive, and expensive is not the same thing as wrong.